Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another episode of Overbooked here on the channel. This is the series where I talk about every single book on my shelves because I will do anything to complete this series. Today we are talking about Kiersten White's The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. Some quick disclaimers before we start. Regardless of where books come from, nobody's paying me to talk about books except my patrons, and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. If you don't want to be spoiled for Frankenstein, a book that came out 200 years ago, maybe pause the video, come back when you've read it, we'll talk then. And lastly, I'm going to link the story graph for the book below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. This is a bit of a spooky one, I would suggest looking them up. This is a young adult horror reimagining of the original book Frankenstein. It originally came out towards the end of 2015 in order to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the original publication of Frankenstein. It's written by Kiersten White, who is an American author who has written a bunch of stuff, some of which we're going to talk about next week, some of which we're talking about now. She's branching out more into adult stuff at the moment. Her latest book is called Hide. I think that's her latest. There might be another one. I've primarily read her YA content. She's also an enormous fan of Mary Shelley, and you can really tell that in the dedication and the acknowledgements of this book. Just for context, my experience reading Kiersten White, I loved her very early on in my kind of reading on the internet journey. I read some of her stuff, thought, this is an author who can do no wrong. I will never read a book of hers that I don't enjoy. I've had more misses than hits lately though, so just fair warning, this isn't going to be the love fest that it would have been had I made this video 5 years ago. In this book, we follow Elizabeth, who is a young girl who at the start of the book is an orphan. She is adopted into the Frankenstein family to kind of be not a governess, but a companion, I suppose, to their young son, Victor, who has some problems. He's going through it. He's not particularly social and he seems a little bit weird. We then move into sort of a dual timeline story where we have Elizabeth in the present in the book trying to find Victor, who has gone off and left her alone at home, and she is trying to work out if she's about to be kicked out of the family, so she needs to find Victor, but Victor's doing some shady things, and his name is Victor Frankenstein. So again, you can figure out what he's doing. And we also have that narrative in the past. We're seeing gradual reveals of things that happened to Elizabeth and that were done by Victor in his childhood and early adolescence. It's a dual plotline. It's dealing with a retelling of Frankenstein from Elizabeth's perspective. That's what the book is. One of the things I really appreciate about this book, having read it multiple times now, I think this might have been my fourth reread to make this video, is the themes. I think particularly the theme of women behind powerful men was very interesting, particularly with such an iconic character as Dr. Frankenstein, getting to see sort of the female influence on him, very interesting. And also Elizabeth in her own right. It's not just a book about her relationship to Victor. And the other theme of the things we're willing to do and the moral compromises we are willing to make to protect ourselves. Really fascinating. Along with the traditional themes that you can't avoid if you're getting into a Frankenstein narrative of what makes a monster and what makes a man, to quote Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I think particularly looking at nature versus nurture, what shapes us, what are we born to be. One of the reasons that I have enjoyed this book on so many different rereads is that I get something new from it every time. The first time I read it, it was very much oh, Elizabeth is just a victim here, that's fine. And then I read it again probably about a year later and went, hang on a minute, she seems kind of complicit in some of these things. That's interesting. And these later rereads, it's got much more convoluted and confused and mixed up and questionable in all of those good ways that make for good books and good discussion topics. It's really thought-provoking in terms of where you draw the line at somebody protecting themselves and somebody doing something or not doing something that causes harm to a bunch of other people. Where are we drawing those moral lines? Where are we creating a barrier of this is the point where Elizabeth is at fault, this is the point where it's Victor who's at fault, this is a point where it's both. I really like that about this story. I've talked about this in a number of videos recently, but I've really been appreciating books that get a little bit messy. So if you're a person who likes a book that kind of causes you to have those thoughts, perhaps you will enjoy this. Maybe if you're looking for something to do a book club about, perhaps. As ever, I'm always really interested thinking about how I would feel about books like this if it didn't have the intense dramatic irony of knowing what happens in Frankenstein. I've talked about this in the past. It's like reading Dracula now, knowing what's happening, is a completely different experience from the first people who read Dracula who had no idea what was going on. That works wonderfully. We have elements of the original Frankenstein story, which even if you haven't read Frankenstein, which I will hold my hand up and say, I have not read the actual book. I have experienced the story in multiple different ways. I've never read the actual book, because while we studied it in school, we studied a play of Frankenstein. Never mind. Just knowing the story is enough for you to appreciate the dramatic irony. I also think it's hugely readable. The actual writing style is very compelling. The way that the chapters flow together and will end on a cliffhanger and just keep you going until the next segment, very readable. This is one of the books where I enjoy Kiersten White's writing style in particular. I think the tone of it's very well handled. Just overall, in terms of the craft of the book, I think this is a great novel. If you didn't know anything about Frankenstein, would you have a completely different reading experience for this? I have no idea. I have no idea what this would feel like reading it without that. I don't know whether it would make any kind of difference, or whether it would feel much more spooky or less spooky, or I've got no idea. I don't know. I'm just interested. Obviously, if you're watching this, I've given enough of the game away that we can't do that social experiment. I don't think I know anyone in my life who doesn't understand what Frankenstein is. It's enough of a pop culture reference. We may never know. But perhaps that's something to bear in mind. I think the fact that this is young adult, or at least that's how it was marketed as, I don't know if it officially was, means that it doesn't have quite as much bite as I think it probably could have, especially for being horror. I think there is a version of this book that is much more aged up and is much more horrific. That's not to say that this book is all fun and games. There are some very dark moments. There are some very dangerous moments. Victor is not a nice character, and there's a lot of tension and stress and scariness in the story, but I think it could have gone further had it not been trying to hit a specific demographic. I also think it meant that the ending was a little bit meh. This isn't a long book, and the ending felt a little bit wishy-washy, just for me personally. I think it's still technically satisfying because you get the resolution of the story, but I just found myself feeling a bit like the whole thing was a journey uphill, and then you think you're going into a big roller coaster dive, and it turns out that it's just sort of going flat now. And that's not as satisfying as had we had a big crash towards the end. I do think that reading this at the right time of year is vital. Not necessarily life or death. If you read this in the summer, you'll be fine. I did for this reread, but it is much more fun to read it towards Halloween and the spookier times of year. I'm really looking forward to hopefully being able to set myself a spooky TBR for 2023, and I would recommend, if you're making one, popping this book on there, because it's just better to read it when everything is slightly darker and colder and more chilly and spooky and atmospheric. Other things you might want to read if you have picked this up already and you're looking for something else, I would recommend something like A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a book that got a lot of TikTok hype in the last few years. I really enjoyed it. It's not a book that I think doesn't deserve that hype, where some of them are a little bit questionable. This is a Dracula retelling of sorts, reimagining from the perspective of Dracula's wives. And again, we have an exploration of an abusive relationship in a lot of similar ways to this, and that is adult fiction, and I think that pulls it off slightly better. In terms of spooky books, can I recommend Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey? That is a modern set, more of a thriller kind of story, but that book truly creeped me out. I think I'm going to do haunted houses for October this year, and that will definitely be on my list. And lastly, this is a bit of a wild card. It's not a horror book. It's got a little bit of violence and body horror towards the end, but it's not officially scary. Hench, which I've reviewed very recently, is a superhero or anti-superhero book, but I think it also deals with the concept of villainy in a very interesting way, and responsibility for villainy. Really cool. Overall, should you read The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein? 5 years ago, I would have said 100% yes, absolutely, it's the best thing since sliced bread, go out and read it. These days, I think if you know you don't like Kiersten White's writing, I don't know if it'll make a big difference for you. And I think I have read spookier YA books, so if that's what you're wanting, perhaps not. But if you want a really interesting take on the Frankenstein story, I think this is a great option for you. Have you read this? Do you have plans to? Are there any classic horror novels that you really enjoy, or classic horror retellings that you're interested in? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also come hang out on Discord, where we have chill chats about books. I would like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams, and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one.
There's gonna be some bloopers now.
She's also an enormous fan of the spooky... She's also an enormous fan...